What could have made a difference and what would have helped. And I really think that someone saying something would have helped. And coming up, there were never many people in my corner to confront my mom. Now, my dad did intervene when it came to getting in between fights between my mom and myself. I mean, one day he had to break the door down because she would demand that I open my room, and if my head wasn't in a book and she was mad about something, she'd be like, "Didn't I tell you to clean those dishes?" And I said, "Well, I did clean the dishes." "Well, what's that plate doing?" And sometimes she'd be in a rage, So my dad intervened that way, but no one really stood up to my mother or called her on her behavior. And I remember as a kid and as a teenager looking around and just being like, doesn't anybody see what she's doing and see what she's saying? And doesn't anybody realize that I'm a minor, that I'm a child? I have no voice, and none of my aunts would ever call her on her behavior. They just go, "Oh, ho, ho," turn their head. My dad did what he could, but he never really stood up to my mother. I remember the one time that I remember feeling like I had support was my middle sister, the one who's pretty quiet. She was over one day, and my mother had been riding my behind like she usually did. And I mean, it could be over anything. And I was just so frustrated. Sometimes it wasn't even one particular event. Sometimes it would just be like the culmination of a week or a month or just whatever, and I couldn't take it anymore. And my mother jumped on me about something, and I remember I had it up to here. And I just screamed and I wailed and I just started crying. And I might have been 14 or 15 years old. And I remember I ran out the back door and I flung open the door and I was just like, "Oh!" And I ran up the driveway and up the street, and I just went around the corner and I was heaving in my neighbor's driveway. And I was just like, and my sister had come right out behind me. And I remember she said, "Mel," and she saw me crying and she took me by the hand, and I remember she marched me back into that house, and my mother was standing in the kitchen, and I think my mother was stunned because she really didn't know what was going on. And my sister had flung open the screen door and left it open, and you don't walk out of my mom's screen door and not close that door behind you. And I remember she marched me back in there in front of my mother, and she looked at my mother square in the eyes and she said, "All you do is live to make people miserable." And she stood me there as if to say, "In your face, Mom, this is your child who you are, putting in this position." And I remember my mother's jaw just dropped because it was like she wasn't used to anybody ever confronting her, telling her what to do. But I remember for that one time feeling so empowered and so grateful for my sister, just someone taking my side. And, but it didn't happen often because that's the only time I can remember. But it seemed like if I had just had an advocate, someone to just call my mother on her behavior, it would have made a world of difference, but it just didn't happen. I don't know if foster care is where I should have been. A lot of people say, is it better for a child to be in a home where there's dysfunction as opposed to being in a system where it's a random draw of the cards as to what kind of home you're going to end up in. But there was never any evaluation for my mom. There was never a diagnosis. There was never a treatment. There was just my mother being allowed to run the house the way she wanted to. So I just think that someone standing up for me would have made a difference, and I know for sure medication would have made a difference had my mom been treated. She seems to have responded to medication very well, but in this world with the stigma, that's why we're doing these kind of projects, to hopefully end the stigma so that, families aren't left in silence and these kids aren't left suffering. So I think that's what would have made a difference, to someone standing up for me and society being at a place where families could feel free to get assistance for someone who's unwilling to get treatment.